Jerry. Jerry, would you mind leading us in an opening prayer?
All right. In the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. I always like to remind people when they gather Jesus' words that where two or more are gathered in his name, he's there with us and in a special way. Help us to focus tonight, learn the inner dwellings or inner meanings of the words we read, to understand them better and to lead us closer to God. In his name we pray. Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy
hallowed be
name.
thy name.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done.
Thy will be done.
On earth
On
as
earth
it is
as
in
it
heaven.
is in heaven.
Give us this
Give us
day
this day
our daily bread,
our daily bread,
and forgive us
and
our
forgive us our
trespasses,
trespasses,
as we forgive
as we
those who
forgive
trespass
those
against us.
trespass against us.
And lead us not
into
into
temptation,
temptation, but deliver us from evil.
but deliver us from evil.
Amen.
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 Father,
I didn't hear your voice there, Joe. I didn't hear your voice, Joe.
It's a pet peeve of mine. You know that, John.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I know that this past week was kind of a long assignment, and I got a few notes about that. So we are going to be reducing the size of the assignments going forward a little bit. Instead of an average of 15 chapters, which means 10 to 20, I'm going to make it an average of about 12 chapters, 10 to 15. And this past week, we were over 20. So it was I know it was a lot to get in this past week, but I felt it was important to do them together. It would have gotten a little difficult and disjointed if we broke it up more than we did. That being said, I think we probably ought to start this evening with just a quick review of the beginning of the patriarchs of Genesis. That's what we've been reading, is about the patriarchs. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the sons of Jacob are generally considered the patriarchs. So we saw Abraham, the original father of the chosen people, and his wife Sarah. And we saw in chapter 12 of Genesis, Abraham committed a deceit. He lied. He told Pharaoh that Sarah was his sister, and Pharaoh did things with Sarah that he shouldn't have, and said, "How could you do this to me?" And then we see Isaac, who had been raised in the house of Abraham, in chapter 26, tell Abimelech, "Yeah, she's my sister," about Rebekah, commits a deceit upon Abimelech. Before he does anything, he finds out and says, "How could you do this to me?" And then we see Jacob, who was raised in the house of Isaac, go to his father, cheat his brother out of his blessing, and commit a deceit. And I'm sure Esau was implicitly thinking to himself, "How could he do this to me?" And that kind of takes us up to where we are now. So we're going to start out with Jacob and Jacob's story. And Jacob's story is one essentially about justice. So Jacob, and we were talking before everybody was on, but the story of Jacob really is a literary masterpiece. It is a piece of literature written in an ancient Hebrew form called a chiastic. And what a chiastic is it's like a step pyramid. It's so step A on the way up, step B on the way up, step C on the way up, top, then step C on the way down, step B on the way down, step A on the way down. A and A are parallel, B and B are parallel, C and C are parallel. So the story of Jacob is bookend by his life in Canaan, in the promised land. And then we start today with him leaving Canaan and going up to the land of his father, up to Haran. We saw that map the other day, way up in Turkey, way north of Israel. And so he arrives in Haran, step A of the pyramid, the arrival in Haran. And Then he meets Laban, his uncle, and makes a deal with him. He enters into an agreement with him where he agrees to trade 7 years of his labor in return for having Laban's son Rachel in marriage. Deal made, step B. Step C, Laban creates a deceitful situation, substitutes his daughter Leah for Rachel in the dark. Jacob wakes up in the morning and says, "Whoa, who are you?" Step C, Laban's deceit. Then we get to the top of the pyramid. Jacob starts to have children. The kids, the family are the top of the pyramid. That's after Jacob then agrees with Laban to give him 7 more years in return for Rachel. But then on the way down the pyramid now, step C on the way down on the opposite side. No, we're not here yet, Lou.
Okay.
Not ready for that yet.
All right.
Step C on the opposite side is Jacob hoodwinking Laban. Now we're going to talk about how this all means, how justice is being worked. So step C on the way up is Laban's deceit of Jacob. Jacob gets his wives, starts having kids. On the way down, Jacob hoodwinks Laban. Step B on the way down, parallel to step B on the way up, a deal with Laban for Rachel's hand. Step B on the way down, a dispute with Laban. They're now fighting. Laban thinks that Jacob is not being fair. Jacob thinks that Laban is not being fair. And Jacob says, we need to get out of here. So, step A on the way down, step A on the way up, arrive in Haran. Step A on the way out, get out of Haran. That's the story of Jacob. So let's go into it a little more depth. It's basically about redemption, justice, and reconciliation. We see in Jacob's family, in his forebears, a history of deceit. Abraham, Isaac, Rebekah, his own mom, his own dad, and then he himself with his brother. And then what we see is redemption and retribution, if you will. The irony of all the deceit having taken place in the family of Jacob, and then Laban turns around and pulls a fast one on Jacob and substitutes Leah for Rachel. And we see how, in order to get what he wants, he ends up having to give Laban 7 years plus 7 years, and then after his family's born, another almost 7 years. Now remember that number 7 means fullness, completeness. He has completed his penance now. Okay? He's been punished, and he's been given a penance for his deceit. He's been deceived himself. Turnaround lesson, penance now given, penance done, 21 years. And now Laban has taken advantage of the situation. He's not paying Jacob the wage that they agreed upon. He's cheating on the deal. So now, instead of it being even after the penance done, Laban now is in a debtor mode. Laban has committed a deceit against Jacob, for which there now needs to be justice. So God comes to Jacob in a dream and says, this is how you get back at him. And this is where we get that little bit of folklore about how to have goats and sheep and cows have babies with spots. And, you know, it's a miracle, essentially. I mean, because putting chutes with bark stripped off in the well or in the trough isn't going to make the animals conceive with spotted animals. That's God. God came to Jacob and said in a dream, this is how we're going to get you even with Laban again. So now the deceit against Laban, the hoodwink, makes things even. All right? And as a result, although the sins are now even, the effects of the sin continue. We see now that Laban's daughters hate him. Rachel and Leah know that he's cheated their husband. They don't want anything to do with him. And they are happy to leave the land with their husband. And so they do. And they take all the herds of all the spotted animals, that is pretty much all the animals now, and they leave Laban destitute. And he hunts them down. He chases them down. And he says, wait a minute, what are you doing? And this is where Jacob gives him a bit of a lecture in chapter 31 and tells him, we aren't cheating you. You cheated us. We're even now. And, Laban says, okay, I get that. And so they shake hands, basically. They enter into a covenant. And they build a pyre of stones to separate the land where Laban can dwell from the land where Jacob will dwell from now on. Everything's made even, but the effect of the sin continues. They still don't like each other. There's hard feelings. Laban says goodbye to his daughters, kisses his grandchildren, doesn't bless Jacob, doesn't give Jacob a hug. There's still hard feelings there. The effect of the sin continues. So Jacob now is on the path to reconciliation. There's been some retribution paid for past sins. Things are even back there, but now he's going back to Canaan. And who lives there? Esau, his brother, who threatened to kill him if he ever comes back. So Jacob says, okay, I got to make a payback here. I got to make things good with Esau. How do I do penance with Esau? So in chapter 32, we see how Jacob is very clever in making penance to Esau. It says that on his way back, he decided to give his brother a present. Chapter 32, verse 14. So he's very clever here. First he says, takes one shepherd and says, here, take 200 female and 20 male goats, and you go off, get started. And then he pulls out 200 sheep and 20 rams, gives them to the second shepherd, says, wait a while, and then follow him. And then he takes the third shepherd and says, here, take 30 camels and their young, and you wait a while. Wait for that second guy to get way out in front of you, then follow him. And then he takes a fourth shepherd and gives him 40 cows and 10 bulls as gifts to Esau. And he says, wait a minute, you just hold on for a while till those camels are out of sight, and then you follow them. Then finally, he takes a fifth shepherd, gives him 20 female and 10 male donkeys as gifts to Esau. Now, imagine you're Esau. You've been given word that your brother Jacob is coming back. And what do? You go out to meet him with 400 men. That's not a good sign for Jacob. Okay, Esau has not forgiven him. Things are not going to go well. And then all of a sudden, this guy comes up with these 200 goats and says, these are gifts from Jacob. And Esau might say something like, well, okay, that's kind of nice, but I'm still ticked. And then half an hour later, another guy comes up with 200 sheep and says, and these are also a gift from Jacob. And Esau's got to be going at this point, whoa, boy, that's pretty nice, but I'm still mad. And, half an hour later, another guy comes up and says, here's a whole bunch of camels as a gift from Jacob. Well, Esau's got to be kind of thinking, this is going to double the size of my herds. This is pretty generous. Maybe this Jacob guy grew up. Maybe he's not so bad anymore, but I'm still mad. And then another guy comes up with a bunch of cows and bulls. At this point, Esau's got to be getting soft on this, right? I mean, this is a very clever way to pay penance, to do penance, to make things right again. He stole Esau's birthright, but Jacob is a wealthy man now. He can afford to be generous. He's probably giving Esau more than he would have gotten in his birthright. So what happens? Well, Jacob still is a little worried about Esau. So for the night, he sends his family back across the other side of the river just in case Esau hasn't forgiven him. And he stays on this side of the river for the night in case Esau tries to attack. He can cut him off the pass. And instead, something spectacular happens. He wrestles with a supernatural being. What the heck is this all about? Well, you can read it as God sent an angel, or God came down in the form of a man and wrestled with Jacob, and they had a big to-do, and ended up God blessed Jacob at the end. and Jacob was injured and he limped for the rest of his life because of it. You can read it that way. But let me ask you all something. Any of you ever wrestled with God? John, you're saying yeah? You ever wrestled with God?
Yeah, I've had a couple of tussles. I always lost, but yeah, I wrestle a little bit.
And when you always lose, do you come out of it the same guy?
No, come out of a better person.
You're different. You're something about you is different, right?
That's right.
When you wrestle with God. And usually when you're wrestling with God, you're trying to resolve something, right?
That's correct. That I was wrong.
Jacob was wrong. Jacob did a lot of wrong things here. And there's a lot of payback here. And he's got to make things right with God. And in the end, he doesn't win, but he's marked. He limps. So maybe he doesn't stand up as straight. Maybe he's not as prideful and as arrogant. But he's wrestled with God. And in the end, he's made things right with God. His reconciliation now is complete. So, he's done penance. He's made retribution. He's made payback. God has given him his blessing. What does that sound like to you? Anybody been to confession lately? Probably not, huh? I mean, seriously. All right? There's a covenantal structure going on here. Remember? This is all the covenant. And covenants today are in the form of sacraments. And we're seeing here a typology of the future sacramental nature of redemption, justice, reconciliation, absolution, and finally, purification. Jacob is forgiven. He's made things right with God. He meets Esau. They get together. They make things right. They embrace. The sins are forgiven. The effects of the sin still exist, though. Jacob doesn't say to Esau, oh, yeah, live here with me. Let our flocks mix together and graze together. No, Jacob says, it's my birthright, dude. You got to go live somewhere else. Take everything I've given you plus your stuff. Go down somewhere else to live. So Esau does. He leaves. He goes down to the very bottom of the Jordan Valley, which is still a relatively fertile area. Okay, if you look at the map here, all right, you see Jerusalem there, and that big sea right there. At the bottom of that sea, as you're looking at the map to your right, where the arrow is right now, see Selah, the Valley of Salt, just above that, that's Edom. That's where Esau went to live. Right there. Yeah, right there. Zor, that's Edom. Edom is the same word as Esau. It means red. If you recall, when Esau was born, he was ruddy. And the land in Edom is red clay. So that's where Esau goes to live. But now, Jacob is getting ready to go back into the promised land, over here to Hebron. See Hebron to the side of Jerusalem? Hebron is also called Bethel. That's where Abraham settled down. That's where Isaac, Rebekah are all buried in the cave in Hebron near Bethel. But before he can go into the promised land, we see the final step in chapter 35, verse 2. As they're getting ready to go into the land, Jacob turns to his family and everybody and says, get rid of the foreign gods among you, then purify yourselves and change your clothes. Then let us go into the Holy Land, that I may there worship, that I may engage in thanksgiving. The Latin word for thanksgiving is Eucharist. What do you do before you receive communion if you're not in a state of grace? You purify yourself. You go to confession. You see how the typology here is playing out? So things now are looking pretty good, but the effects of sin remain. Jacob was raised in the house of Isaac, who was raised in the house of Abraham, who all committed deceits, acted in bad ways. Jacob's sons all see how he acted with his uncle up in Haran, and they're raised in that kind of a situation. So Dinah, his daughter, is raped. That's bad. But his sons decide, we're going to be really bad. We don't want justice. We want complete and utter destruction. So his sons, Simeon and Levi, create a deceitful situation with the Canaanites, convince them that they're going to give them their daughters in marriage and take their sons if they will be circumcised. And the Canaanites figure, okay, let's do that. So all the Canaanite men get circumcised, and while they're walking around with their legs crossed, because it hurts like crazy to be circumcised as an adult male, Simeon and Levi kill them all. Everybody. They completely destroy every living thing, take their herds, their flocks. And Jacob says, are you guys out of your freaking minds? What are you doing? Yeah, Dinah was raped, that's bad, and we need justice, but man, talk about overdoing it. You've committed hundreds and hundreds of violent murders. The Canaanites are going to be really ticked. We got to get out of here. You've caused huge problems for the family. The effect of the sins still remain. We see it again in Reuben, the oldest son. Reuben lay with Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant. This was a power play by the oldest son. This is a tribe. Tribal politics mean that the most powerful male rules. And that's the oldest male till he can't defend his position. Then the next oldest male, toughest male, comes up. Reuben's making a power play. He's trying to push his dad out. Jacob is not happy. Reuben loses his birthright here. So the effect of the sins still exists. There's been penance, there's been retribution, there's been reconciliation, there's been absolution and purification and thanksgiving and worship. But just like with original sin, Adam and Eve, the very beginning of Genesis, we can have the original sin forgiven, taken away, not on our soul anymore, but we still suffer the effects because Adam and Eve lost something that they can no longer pass on to their children. That sanctifying grace, that perfect relationship with God, that perfect physical state of lack of corruption. They can't pass that on because they don't have it anymore. Same thing with Jacob. He can't pass on a righteous position because he gave it up. He showed his children a bad way. He's now sorry, he's learned, he's made retribution, but the effect on the kids still exists. And we see that still today on how the sins of the parents can be visited upon their children. You know, the alcoholic dad may end up going to AA, but raising the kid for 13 years as an alcoholic is going to have an effect on that kid that's not going to ever go away. See that in so many things. Those are the lessons that we're supposed to learn from the story of Jacob. This chiasm, it's called, this step pyramid story. I'm going to stop at this point. We're about halfway through. We still have the story of Jacob's sons, Joseph and Judah particularly, which is kind of a good place to break. And open it up at this point if anybody has questions, comments on the Jacob story.
I do. The Jacob story obviously is predominant, but you spoke earlier about Esau and how he turned away and married Canaanite or married non-Hebrew women and went kind of his way. There's not much else about him, though. Is that important?
I kind of skipped it, but there's a whole chapter. I think it's chapter 36, maybe. It's all about
Right.
Esau. It's all about the Edomite list, chapter 36. Edomite means Esau's relatives. And it basically is telling us Esau has gone his own way. They're now living in Edom.
Right.
And we're going to see this later when we get back from Exodus and they come back from Egypt and they're trying to get back in the promised land. And they've got to go through 3 lands to get into the promised land: Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Edom, it's descendants of Esau. Moab, you remember who Moab was? The son of Lot and his one daughter. Ammon, you remember who Ammon was? The Ammonites. The other son of Lot and his other daughter. These are the countries that Israel essentially goes to war with once they return to get back into the promised land. So the effects of the sin remain, that they're never mended. I mean, chapter 36 I find to be moderately interesting, but not worth spending a lot of time on, other than to say Esau went his own way, created his own tribe, his own kingdom, and they became enemies of Israel down the road. That's the point of all of chapter 36.
Okay. Well, we don't really know that they became enemies of Israel till later, right? Chapter
Right.
36 doesn't tell us that.
No, we don't now when we're reading here. But the Israelites who would have gotten all 5 books of the Pentateuch at the same time would have known these stories.
Just as an aside, chapter 36, when you've got like 20 chapters to read, chapter 36 is a blessing because you can just speed read it because all those names are ahead.
You're welcome.
Deacon Jeffrey said that they lost sanctifying grace, and we lose that too through our sin. Do we? I mean, we have the opportunity through the sacraments to get that sanctifying grace back, right? Where they didn't have that.
Well,
Or
they
did.
sanctifying grace essentially means being in right relationship with God. And, it's in a different sense because they didn't have Christ yet and the gates of heaven were not opened yet, but they could still be in right relationship with God. And Jacob was not in right relationship with God for a lot of the time that he was up in Haran until he made things right and was sorry and came back and purified himself. And then, I would say he was in right relationship with God after that.
But the one thing that always confuses me, Jeff, is didn't God tell Jacob how to deceive Laban?
Yes, but remember what was happening here. Jacob has already now paid the price for his sins and for his family's past sins. He's done the full penance. And now Laban reneges on the deal again. He is now creating a situation where he is in sin. He owes a payback to Jacob. And God is saying, okay, this is how we make Laban even with us.
Okay.
All right, are we ready to move on to the next section? The next section is often called the story of Joseph. And Joseph clearly is the main character, but it's really not about Joseph. It's really about another brother. Lou, if you could pull up that first list now. Sons of Jacob.
So you want the other one?
Yeah, the other one.
Okay.
No, wait.
I
No,
think
this is the right one. This is the right one. Okay, so what you have here, you have Abraham and Sarah give birth to Isaac. Isaac and Rebekah give birth to Jacob. Jacob, 4 wives, well, 2 wives and 2 maidservants. First, Reuben, the eldest, who tried to displace his father, lost his birthright. Second, Simeon, and third, Levi, who have created a very, very bad situation for the family by freaking losing their minds and killing hundreds of people. Understandably, their sister was raped. They were ticked off. But one rape is not justice for hundreds and hundreds of murders. Then we have Judah, number 4. After that, Bilhah, the other maidservant of Rachel, who couldn't have children at that point, has Dan and Naphtali. Then Zilpah, the other maidservant, Leah's maidservant, has Gad and Asher. Leah then has Ishkatar and Zebulun. And then finally, Rachel is blessed and has Joseph. And this is basically where we are now. They're on their way back to the promised land. Rachel is probably just about to be pregnant with Benjamin at this point, and they're moving back into the promised land. The sons of Jacob are growing, becoming hale and hearty. And Joseph, the youngest at this point, other than Benjamin, who may not even be born yet, is kind of an arrogant little smug brat. He's kind of lording over his older brothers because he's Jacob's favorite. Jacob's favorite because he is the fruit of the honest deal with that Jacob entered with Laban to receive Rachel as his bride, who he loved. And so he loves Joseph the best at this point, the child of Rachel. And, the older brothers are kind of ticked off. So now this whole story of Joseph, I don't even need to say it's a literary masterpiece. It's been turned into plays and movies and musicals and, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. This is an incredibly and great, embraceable story. A lot of drama. So Reuben initially says, wait a minute, you guys, back off. Let's not kill him. Let's just throw him in the cistern. With the intention, Reuben has the intention, not telling his brothers, I'll come back and get him later, give him back to dad, and then maybe dad will forgive me and give me my birthright back. Well, Reuben's plan is foiled by Judah, number 4 here. He jumps in without telling Reuben and convinces the brothers, rather than to kill Joseph, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. The Midianites take him out of the well, they sell him, they take him to Egypt, and Judah does God's will without even knowing that he's doing it by sending Joseph to Egypt, where ultimately, as the result of his hardship, the entire nation of Israel is saved. In the meantime, Judah's no prize. He's a man's man in a day and age when men treated women like possessions. His wife has died. He decides to go hire a prostitute, what he thinks is a prostitute. Turns out to be his daughter-in-law, who he's cheated in a deal. Cheated in a deal. How many times are these people going to cheat people and deceive people? I mean, unbelievable. And she ends up getting pregnant with his child. And so Judah is no prize at this point. So Joseph now is in Egypt. And we see in chapter 39 that Joseph is what was referred to in earlier chapters with respect to Jacob, with respect to Isaac, as a man of God, a man who the Lord is with. So here again, we have miniature chiastic literature. We see throughout chapter 39 and 40 the same phrase in Hebrew appear over and over again. Chapter 39, verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph. Chapter 39, verse 5. For Joseph's sake, the Lord's blessing was on everything he owned. Verse 9. How can I sin against God? Verse 21, the Lord was with Joseph. 23, the Lord was with Joseph. Chapter 40, verse 1, dream interpretation. It's because of God, not me. Again, verse 8, verse 16, verse 38, about God. It's about God. The Lord is with Joseph. Joseph is about God. The phrase that's being used there over and over again is a step pyramid phrase in Hebrew. The Lord is with Joseph. Joseph is with the Lord. Over and over and over again, Joseph is the chosen one of God to save the nation of Israel. He never takes credit for anything. So we see Judah, the screw up, and his brothers come into Egypt to try and buy grain. We know the whole drama, the whole story of how it works out. And in chapter 44, Joseph has set up this clever little drama to play with his brothers. And it says, verse 14, chapter 44, when Judah and his brothers entered Joseph's house, he was still there. So they flung themselves on the ground before him. And now with respect to them stealing his cup and his money and the grain, which they didn't really do, Joseph set it all up. Joseph says, wait a minute. Abraham deceived Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said, how could you do such a thing? Isaac deceived Abimelech, and Abimelech said, how could you do such a thing? Laban deceived Jacob, and Jacob said, how could you do such a thing? Now Joseph has worked the deception on his brothers, makes them think that they stole stuff, and Joseph says, how could you do such a thing? The flip-flop here, the irony here is intentional. All right? Things are being made right. Things are being set back to the way they're supposed to be. So we have Judah now, the screw-up, who hasn't actually walked away from God. He does his penance. He comes before Joseph and says, let my brother Benjamin go. If you keep him, it'll kill my dad. He's a little guy. Don't punish him. For his sake, for my dad's sake, in chapter 33, verse 33, let me, your servant, remain in place of the boy as your slave, and let the boy go back with his brothers. This is called penal substitution. Offering yourself to pay the price for someone else's sins. It's also called sometimes substitutional atonement, making right someone else's wrong by offering yourself. Gee, who does that sound like? Who offered himself for other people's sins? So now, for one of the first times in Genesis, we see typology of Christ. Judah has stepped forward and said, do whatever you will that you want to do to me, just let the boy go. Just whatever he did, I'll take it on me. Make me the one who suffers. He is now a type. Remember that word, type. It's that exegesis word. We see typology. So Judah is now a type of Christ. He has done the substitutional atonement. He is a Christ figure. That's really what the whole story of Joseph is about, getting Judah to this place. And so now we go to chapter 49, where Jacob is giving his final testament to his sons. And okay, Lou, go to that second graph now. Second slide.
There we go.
Now I still got chapter 49 and a map.
Give me a second, sorry. There we go.
That's the one. All right. So we've got son number one, Reuben. And in chapter 49, Jacob says to Reuben, you were my first. You climbed into your bed and defiled my couch. You're done. Out of here. Then he turns to Simeon and Levi, the brothers, and says, you're my second and third. You are violent savages. You're done. Out of here. So he finally gets to number 4 in line. And he says, Judah, your brothers shall praise you. You have grown up, and the scepter shall never depart from Judah, or the mace from between his feet, until tribute comes to him and he receives the people's obedience.
Where did you read that from, Jeff?
That's verse 10, chapter 49.
Yeah, okay.
This is royal language. This is talking about the King of Kings. Judah has now been elevated to that highest place because he is engaged in shown. Now, this is not the word they would have used at the time. They wouldn't have understood it this way. We only know this in retrospect. Christ-like love. And then we see, spoilers coming, okay? King David and King Solomon come from the line of Judah. Jesus is in the line of David. Judah is the one who becomes the father of the nations that Jesus is born into. So, these are the 12 sons of Jacob, 12 tribes of Israel. Not
Jeff,
exactly.
can you say that again?
Say what
That
again?
just that last sentence or so.
The 12 tribes of Israel?
No, the Judah is
Judah was the chosen one of God who was the type of Christ. He was the one that God chose to continue the line that David became king, second king. He replaced Saul, who came from Benjamin's line, the wrong line. God wanted it to be Judah's line. He was the typology of Christ. David, Solomon, kings of Judah, through their line, Jesus was born. Through them, what existed in Israel is what Christ was born into.
All right, time out.
Okay?
You said a whole bunch, and I see that Judah and King David lead Jesus.
Yep.
Did you get all that from chapter 49, verse?
No. We're jumping ahead. I'm giving you spoilers at this point.
Okay, all right.
I'm trying to give you the deeper meaning, the fundamental truth that comes from this second story of the patriarchs, the story of Joseph and Judah.
And Deacon Jeff,
Right?
Judah, is that because Judah made the sacrifice for Joseph? So that was the atonement in making
Yes.
it right.
Yes, exactly. Okay? Joseph was, he was in a good place. He was doing really well for himself. That wasn't ever Christ. That's not the Christ type. Okay, so what we see then are the 12 sons of Jacob, 12 tribes of Israel, but not exactly. Because what we're going to see is when they come back from Exodus, they move into the promised land, they're each given a different part of the country for their tribe to dwell in. So Reuben has an area, Simeon has an area. Levi does not get an area because the Levites do not dwell as a tribe. They become the priestly caste, which we will see in Exodus, the caste that the tribe from which Moses and Aaron arise, and the Levites then live among all of the tribes as the priests, the spiritual leaders of each tribe. So they don't get part of the land. So now we're down to 11. Judah gets an area, Dan gets an area, Naphtali gets an area, Gad gets an area, Asher gets an area, Ishkatar gets an area, Zebulun gets an area. Joseph dies in Egypt, but he has two sons. And we see here at the end of Genesis, Jacob giving the blessing to Manasseh and Ephraim the same way that Isaac gave Esau's blessing to Jacob. He essentially makes them his sons, even though they are his grandsons. So we were down to 11 tribes, but now we take Joseph out and put Manasseh and Ephraim in, we're back up to 12, with Benjamin at the end. And what we're going to see is these tribes are separated throughout the land of Israel when they come back from Egypt. And Benjamin and Judah, the tribes of Benjamin and Judah, are in the very south. Just keep that in mind for future reference. So we are at the end of the beginning. The word Genesis literally means beginning. Everything now with God's chosen people, all the descendants of Abraham, is great. It couldn't be better. They're living in the land of Goshen, which is a fertile part of the Nile Delta. They've got flocks, they've got crops, they've got wives and children. The Pharaoh loves them. He's given them gifts. They're really elevated in the eyes of the people. Things are going good. That's the end of Genesis. And we have now just completed what would, in most cases, be an entire Bible study. You've done the book of Genesis. So let me ask you, you want to keep going?
Yes. I do.
Definitely, yes, I do.
All right. So next is Exodus.
Okay, hold on. Time out.
Now, we're not going to Exodus yet. We're going to stop here for a minute. And before we move on, this is where I want to open it up. So go ahead, Joe.
So the line of Judah, you say Genesis is all about Judah. The line of Judah leads to David and ultimately Jesus, right?
Yep.
But and we'll learn more about that as we go on. But if I were to have a son, I have sons. If I were to wish my son to be like anyone,
You'd want to be like Joseph.
of course. So I mean, the forgiveness in his heart for his brothers, to me, was an amazing part of the story. So I missed the main part of the story, Judah. Okay, so and I get it, but so Joseph is a means to an end here, and not really much else.
Yep.
Okay.
So Jeff, is there any symbolism between the 12 tribes and 12 disciples?
Oh, the 12 apostles. Absolutely. Absolutely, there is. And this, I'm going to jump way ahead into a book that we're not even going to read, the book of Revelation. There's a passage in the book of Revelation that John is looking at the people around the altar in heaven. And the way that it's translated in our Bibles is it was 144,000. You've heard that? The saved are 144,000. They have washed their robes in the blood of the martyrs. That's a horrible translation. And it takes away all of the symbolic meaning. It really makes my blood boil that they translate it that way. Because what it says in the original Greek is the number was 12 times 12 times 1,000. Remember, numerology is really important in the ancient Hebrew world. 12 tribes of Israel. 12 apostles who ministered to the Jews and the Gentiles. The whole world times 1,000, a really big number of the saved. It's not 144,000 is a meaningless number. What's meaningful is the tribes of Israel, the Gentiles, many of them.
Got it. Thank you. I don't want to boil your blood, Jeff.
Well, I know, but every time we read that, and when I had to read it, I used to consider in my head thinking to myself, I'm not going to read this. I'm going to change it. I mean, you're not allowed to do that when you lecture, so I never did. But it used to tick me off enough to think about it. Yeah, we jumped way ahead here after Exodus. But now, if you look at this map, you can see Judah's way down in the south, Benjamin just above him. Simeon ends up down here somehow, and I don't have an explanation for that. But then you see at the very bottom, at the bottom of the Dead Sea. Well, go back, Lou. What happened? Oh, never mind. That was me. I touched my screen and messed it up. There we go. Bottom of the Dead Sea is the Edomites. That's Esau. Immediately to their right are the Moabites, the son of Lot. And then just above Moab to the right, just off this picture, is the Ammonites, is Ammon. Is that Ammon? And that's the Ammon River, so it flows out of Ammon.
Okay.
Yeah, all right. And so to get back into the Holy Land after Exodus, they had to travel through Edom, through Moab, through Ammon, and then they would have gone in right between where Reuben and Gad are, above the Dead Sea. That's where the crossing of the Jordan is, right there. It's because you see Jerusalem is right there.
Okay.
And then this is how the land was eventually split up among the 12 tribes. But if you look up at the top, you see Manasseh. That's not one of the 12 sons of Jacob. That's one of Joseph's sons. And below Manasseh, you see Shechem. Below Manasseh is Ephraim. That's Joseph's other son. And you don't see Levites on here anywhere.
Hey, Lou, can you send us these pictures and handouts? They'll just help us recall what we've been talking about here.
I'll try to, yes.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
All right. Any other questions? This is a
Why
look
did
ahead.
Manasseh get so much? Why did Manasseh get so much area?
I don't know the answer to that, Jerry. He was just lucky, I guess. I think that part of it, they gave more land to brothers whose land was not as good, and they gave less land to brothers whose land was really good. So
Probably.
the plains that got the Mediterranean rain, like Dan and Ephraim and Benjamin, those are very fertile areas. Same thing with Asher, Naphtali, and Zebulun. The northern highlands is that lower part of Manasseh. The lower part is desert, and everything to the right is more semi-arid dry land with just a few rivers. And these rivers that are marked on here, you know, living in Pittsburgh, we think of rivers like, you know, the Allegheny, the Monongahela. These rivers are more like the North Branch of Pine Creek. I mean, you know, you can step across them.
Deacon Jeff, this was where, is that Lot went to the right when Abram and him separated because Lot said, oh, this is a fertile, I'm going to take this?
They were coming from the north.
Right,
And so Lot went to the right to where Dan and Ephraim and Benjamin are,
right.
and the land of the Philistines as well. And Abraham went to the left,
Correct.
where Reuben and Gad are, and part of the northern part of the Dead Sea.
But
Right.
Jeff, did Reuben get credit for a great sandwich?
No, but for some really great paintings.
Very good, Jeff.
I just wanted to confirm, and this is just pretty, I guess, an obvious point, but just to clarify, Mary is the descendant of Judah. That's how Jesus is connected to this genealogy. It's through the mom, not the dad.
Except that Joseph was the descendant of Judah.
Oh, he
And
was?
the descendant of David, who was the descendant of Judah. Joseph was the father. We are not sure about Mary's line, but we think she was probably of the tribe of Judah as well. But the child's inheritance and tracing came through the father, even adopted fathers. Adoption was a covenantal relationship. Remember, adoption is kinship by oath, and it was considered just as strong as kinship by blood. So where a child was adopted by the ancient Hebrews, they were considered just as much entitled to the inheritance as blood children.
Oh, okay. I think I was taught the other way around, but yeah.
Yeah, we think, we're not sure. Most theologians think that Mary's line came from David and Judah as well, but we know that Joseph's line did. That's why they had to go back to Bethlehem for the census, because that was the city of Judah. When you go back to the original city for the census. And David, the city of David, Bethlehem, in the line of Judah, Bethlehem was Joseph's city of origin, not Mary's, the father's.
Okay.
And so now I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here and just give you a quick peek at what's going to come down the road here. After they all settled back in the land of the Holy Land after Exodus, you've heard of the lost tribes of Israel? That's everybody except Joseph and Benjamin. Everybody north of Benjamin is part of the lost tribes. They don't exist anymore. They were wiped off the face of the earth. And Simeon too, which I don't get, and I'm going to have to take a look into that. But everything north and east of Benjamin is gone. All Jews today Every single Jew today can trace their line either to Judah, Benjamin, or Levi. Because remember, some of the Levites lived with the Benjamites and the Judites.
Huh.
We'll talk about why that happened and how that happened as we get there. But now, Judah and Benjamin, who was their mom?
Rachel.
Yeah,
Rachel.
Rachel. L. What did I
Of
say about
God.
of God? She was the woman who had the heart of God. Or God had her heart, another chiastic literature. All right, any other questions, comments on Genesis?
No, loving it though. Love it.
Did you get any insight in that? You know, I'm sure some of you have read Genesis before and read it as a story, a wonderful story. It's really entertaining, as Joe said. Did you get anything here today that you didn't think about before?
Yeah.
I get it.
Pretty much all of
a
it.
lot of.
One at a time.
I just wish I was getting that as I read it and not waiting to hear it from you.
Yeah, same here.
Salvation history through covenants. Covenantal theology leads to sacramental theology. Typology leads to Christ. I told you from the very beginning, this whole exercise is looking at salvation history, the process by which God designed our salvation after the fall, and it's all done through covenantal theology. That's why I gave you that picture with the 30-degree angle on it. That's what everything in the Old Testament is about.
And Deacon, this is really why we're doing this, because to get those perspectives that maybe we just don't read, see, hear, understand, but everyone gets a different piece. And when we bring it together, to me, it has so much more meaning and impact.
Now, I thought we were going to learn some hidden secret behind Joseph and his forgiveness and how good he was, but it's just,
Judah came out.
yeah,
of
it
the
doesn't
womb.
matter. Judah did. He came out of the woodwork.
Joseph was an instrument of God's plan. That's important, but he was not the focus of God's plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, Joseph's a heck of a guy. They made a musical about him.
Yeah.
And it's funny because in the afternoon session, Joe, Roy said the same thing that you said. He said, if I wanted my kid to be like someone, I want him to be like Joseph.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. But you know what? We're not the ones that get to pick. God does.
And Deacon, that really went back to like the reconciliation of the sacrifice that Judah made.
Yep,
And why that continued on and down the line of King David and Jesus.
that's right. And the unforgiven sins of Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. Now, you know, we're going to see all through the rest of the Bible that the tradition in the ancient Hebrew culture of everything going to the oldest son is broken every single time. Jacob, not Esau. Judah, not Reuben. David, not all of his older brothers. God's way is not our way. God looks into the heart.
And it reminds me of how Jesus said, the first shall be last and last shall be. Like, it's that whole reverse. I mean, wasn't that something that Christ touched on as well?
I didn't catch all that, Jenny. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. It reminds me of, you know, in Christ's teachings, he always talks about like the first shall be last.
Yep.
Right. So it's that same reversal of what's like intuitive to.
Yes, exactly. All right. For next week, since everybody wants to go on, you're biting off the next bite. It's a shorter assignment. I want you to do Exodus chapter 1 through Exodus chapter 13, verse 16. It's only about half of chapter 13. So it's 12 and a half chapters. It's a shorter assignment. And we now are jumping 400 years ahead on the timeline.
Great.
And I
Things
just
are
want to
not
clarify.
so good anymore in Goshen. Land of Goshen.
So I just want to clarify for you guys. You want to see the tribe images that we talked about? Is that it, or did you want to see what else did you want to see?
The map.
The
Map of the 12 tribes.
Okay, I want to give everybody a little bit of a heads up, and I don't know how many have the Bible that I have, the Catholic Study Bible,
Yeah.
but if you go to the back, the very back of the Catholic Study Bible, there is a whole section of maps. And you will find map number 2, if you have the third revised edition, is this map, which is just what Joe, is a big version.
Oh, yeah. You know, yeah. Got it.
Okay, yeah, there you go.
So Deacon, I was thinking of purchasing that online book. So if I do, we'll snapshot those.
Yeah, that was great, Lou. Appreciate that. That was what you were able to get up was good. The maps are helpful. They help me. I know I like looking at the map to kind of put a name with a place and get an idea of where things are organized.
Right. Sometimes it's hard to encapsulate that without
I
seeing
find
it.
myself looking at the maps in the Catholic Study Bible all the time. And if you see a place and you want to know where it is, there's a map guide in the Catholic Study Bible. All the locations are in alphabetical order, and you go to that and it'll tell you which numbered map, and then it'll give you a letter and a number that you can cross-reference to get the spot where it exists on the map. So it might say map 3Y4, and you'll see across the top of the map or letters, down the side or numbers. You just go Y4, and it'll take you there.
So you just sold me on buying that then, because that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I like the Catholic Study Bible a lot. I told you that. I think it's got a lot of good stuff in it. The footnotes can be a little bit debatable sometimes. Not all theologians agree on all the commentary in the Catholic Study Bible. That's okay. I mean, I'm fine with that, because I look at other commentaries too. But it's got a lot of really good stuff in it.
I just wanted to share with you, I was in another meeting yesterday, and someone was asking the question about where do we find find a Bible that covers the readings for the Mass, and I shared with them the Catholic Study Bible that you said that's what you use to prepare for Mass.
Yep.
Right. To me, it was a nice feeling to be able to share that with other people, because I wouldn't have known that otherwise without having you mention that.
Yeah, just to be clear though, remember we talked about translations. The Catholic Study Bible is not a translation. The Catholic Study Bible uses the New American Bible Revised Edition translation, and it incorporates that translation into the Catholic Study Bible, which adds lots of other stuff. All right.
Same one you used for lecturing, Lou.
Yeah, the New
No?
American Bible Revised
Yeah,
Edition.
it's the same thing.
Yep. All right. Joe, how about you close us with a prayer?
We'll do that. Thanks. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
You are unmuted.
Dear Lord, please help. Hey, Dick, will you mute?
He
Thanks.
did.
Thank you, Lord.
You are
He just unmuted there. Thank you, Dick. Please stay muted.
Dear Lord, thank you for the knowledge that is at least presented to us. Help us to absorb it, to remember it, to reflect on it, and to learn to live in your grace by the knowledge that we gain from these sessions. We love you. That's why we're here, to find out more about you. Please be with us always. And we'll pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy
Be
name.
thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
Deliver us from evil.
Amen.
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 Thanks, guys.
Great job, everybody.
Thank you very much.